With the words of Solo Wing, the curtain rises.
My first impression was he had potential.
This is Carrier Wing Ypsilon. I mean, if the title screen is to be believed. It could also be called Plain Game, because that's what the folder calls it. So, tip number 1, go with the fancier name. I think it's got more marketability. Let's stick with that, because Plain Game, that's going to be hard to find. I don't think people are going to be all that interested. Let's just be honest. Anyway, this is a game, or rather, it's potentially going to be a game by the people who did Gearbits. And I love Gearbits. I love their expansion substantially more, and I kind of wish it was standalone because it blew Gearbits out of the water, but Gearbits was pretty good on its own too. This was something they emailed me about, saying, hey, I got this demo of something I'm kind of working on, I'd like some feedback, and we noticed that your name is kind of based on the guy from Ace Combat. Would you be interested on this game that's kind of like a new Ace Combat? Which, not to make this about me or anything, that's actually a misconception. I got my hand on years before in a different flight sim that was recreating a historical event that the Ace Combat guy was then based off of. So if anything, the guy's named after me. But we have a similar taste in color schemes, so I let it slide. And let's be real, if I stole my name from any game, it's the dragon from Panzer Dragoon. But I do like Ace Combat, and while I'm not normally a demo kind of guy, unless it's something that immediately connects with me or it eats my life for like a week like Xenoverse 2 did, and the reason is because I like to have a more complete look at what a game is as opposed to just a vertical slice. I've actually told this to numerous people over emails. I like to have more of a just general sense of what something is going to be in its completeness, so even just a pre-release beta to me is more preferable, but it was at the time not publicly available, which it is as of now. You can get it right here. Boop. But either way, this is sort of a free consultation / review for some feedback that they wanted to see about their Ace Combat style indie game, Carrier Wing Ypsilon, and honestly, in broad strokes, I think it's on the right track. However, I do have some concerns I want to bring up. But it's also worth knowing that this is pre-release and they don't really have a time frame on this, so everything is potentially subject to change. So just be aware, things could be different if and when this thing actually fully comes out. First things first, like always, as a PC game, I am playing this on the Steam Deck, and it works relatively well. You do need to enable Proton 9-4, but then it launches totally fine, and it's completely controller compatible. So that's pretty good right there. Now the story is set in some sort of spacey, far-flung future. This might actually be connected to Gearbits. It's not entirely clear, but it has sort of a similar setting, set in a spacey kind of future. You have two factions. One is sort of a royal army that is massively understaffed and are forced to hire mercenaries, such as you and your wingmate, to go and help bolster their numbers. The second faction is a series of pirates that are raiding these ruins, which are thought to be effectively worthless, and it's more quizzical than anything, but they're putting a lot of effort and manpower behind this, and you're kind of forced to go up against them. This is interesting, because they have a lot of really cool plot threads that they're building up to. I'm not sure it's 100% perfectly executed as of now, however. For example, you and your wingmate are largely inconsequential to the plot at this point. I don't even remember the two characters' names, and your wingmate is faceless. However, there is a point where the plot actually diverges, and you can actually join the pirates. And I think this might be setting up that your wingmate sort of becomes a rival character. I would suggest maybe giving him a bit of a redesign so he's more noteworthy, because I think setting him up as a rival would be great, especially because the level where you can actually swap sides, he's not with you. So they really are kind of setting up that he could be your ultimate rival, sort of a Ace Combat Zero thing going on. Now, the other issue I have with this plot splitting type thing is just how sort of awkwardly heavy-handed it is in the moment. You're basically in a situation where you're protecting a bunch of unarmed crafts, and the pirates show up in their big giant destroyer, and they're like, hey, go shoot the guys you're working for, and maybe we'll pay you more in the future. They're very obscure. They're like, we can make it worth your while, but honestly, if I'm a mercenary, I want to see numbers. Like, if I'm really throwing away my loyalties here for coin, and I'm doing it while shooting unarmed people, I would like to at least have some sort of sense that this is definitely going to be worth it, you know? Like, I feel like doing this while you're shooting your teammates who are unarmed, I need to stress that, just feels a little heavy-handed, especially in a situation where you're not really guaranteed any sort of payout, and as of now, the only reason you'd really do it is just to see what happens. There's not really any in-universe way that this makes a lot of sense. I think if you could tweak a few text boxes here and just make their appeal to you joining them make a little bit more sense, you could have something that actually works. I also noticed that in the story, there are a couple of typos. I saw assess misspelled, vent was misspelled, and if I remember correctly, that was specifically right before like level 5 on the Imperial Royal side. Also, I noticed, I don't know if this was intentional or a bug or something, but I noticed that a lot of text boxes in the cutscenes would have like blank text boxes between transitions, and I'm not sure why. I would probably remove those though, or have a slightly smoother transition. But I do appreciate the story in broad strokes, and even if you join the pirate side, there's an interesting thing where they actually kind of let you in on what their big evil maniacal plan is, but they keep it vague enough that you don't actually know what you're doing. And as someone who's actually kind of interested in where this plot is going, that is a great tease. If you're using this as a demo, it just lets you know enough to get you invested. I do appreciate how they set that up. Really well done. Overall, the story right now, it's a little heavy-handed in some places, it's a little awkward in some places, it needs a spell check and maybe a few script revisions, but it's going somewhere that I do think is engaging for this type of game. And it's setting up some plot threads that I think could be taken in some really interesting places. Now, in terms of gameplay, similarly, I think this game is absolutely on the right track, and before I talk about anything else and get critical, there is one thing I absolutely want to highlight here and make sure is clear to everyone. This game completely nails the feel of Ace Combat. If there's one thing the developer takes away from all of this, please don't touch the physics. It plays really well. It is an absolute treat to fly around in this game. It's awesome. Seriously, you've got the physics right, leave it alone. That said, while I do think the game is a treat to play, it does have its issues, and again, part of that's probably because this is very much an alpha, but there are some general issues about the game. Like, before you even get into the game, I actually have some problems with the GUI. For one thing, the way that the GUI highlights text for selecting things in menus, this could entirely be a me problem, but I had trouble figuring out which one was the highlighted option and which one wasn't. Now, eventually I figured it out, but I think just a small graphical tweak to make it really clear which one is highlighted versus the other would probably benefit this game very, very well. Tweaking the colors of the UI also would probably help with clarity. There was another issue with the UI as well. The first time I selected a mission in the game, I declined to sortie, and when I did so, I wanted to go look at my loadout just to make sure I was equipped properly, and the menu kind of broke. It dumped me into the main menu, and I had no control over the options or the menu and just had to restart the game. So you could probably stand to tweak the menus a little bit as well. Once you start getting into the missions themselves, you begin by going through a briefing, you get to select your plane, and I'm gonna say right now, the planes are pretty cool. They're sort of going for a futury space version of existing planes, sort of like how Ace Combat 3 did, except without the problem that the English version of Ace Combat 3 gutted 99% of the game's content. Don't play the English version of Ace Combat 3 is what I'm saying. Get a Japanese version and patch it. It is a substantially better experience. But the idea of taking regular planes and making them more futury and spacey, it's great because, first of all, like Ace Combat 3, this game does have space levels that have completely different physics, and you almost don't even notice it. The game even points this out. It's like, yeah, you'll probably be fine, you won't even notice, but you can pull high G turns a lot faster. It's very, very smooth to go into space. But these planes go into space, they fight in atmosphere as well. It works for sort of a futury sort of space situation. They're great planes. I especially like the starting plane because it honestly looked the most spacey, and the other two were just kind of there, but it's nice. You can then select a loadout by purchasing equipment, and your loadout can contain up to 3 different weapons, and you can build whatever loadout you really want. Although I will say, if we are going for sort of a futury spacey theme, there could be some more sci-fi weapons in here. I mean, Ace Combat was happy to give you a laser and a basically screen-clearing nuke. We could probably stand to go a little bit more sci-fi with the weapons if we really wanted to. And you can also gain extra equipment that allows you to modify how you play. There's even training wheels that make your plain ridiculously powerful. I like these, but I do think they are kind of boring for upgrades, as they are mostly just statistical things. I think you could have some more meaningful things that would change how you actually use your plane and how it would ultimately fit into your playstyle, rather than purely statistic values. Although the fact that you do have the ability to customize your stuff, that's very cool. Also, you can select your paint job, which is fantastic. Except my paint job isn't in here for some reason. Come on, dev. Add my colors. But there's plenty of customization for your plane to rock out to your next mission. And that's fantastic. Customization options are always a plus, and it's definitely encouraging to see that customization is here. Once you get into levels proper, it's your standard Ace Combat fare, and once again, I want to highlight that this game is an absolute treat to fly around in. The physics between both the space and atmosphere is slightly different, but again, like the game even points out, you probably won't even notice it. It's just that smooth. Most levels have different themes and targets to go after, but the approach is more or less the same. You lock on with your missiles. If you run out of missiles, you shoot with your machine gun. Sometimes you use bombs against ground targets if you're not like me and you just like to fly headlong into ground targets. I did that in Ace Combat as well. I don't know why. I don't like bombs. I prefer locking onto things and driving straight into the dirt. That's my style, I guess. But either way, it feels good and there's a great deal of variation in the missions. However, there are a few issues here as well. And again, a lot of it's probably because this is very early and just needs refinement, but there are some things here I want to highlight. First and foremost is there are some camera issues, primarily that of the two camera modes that exist, it doesn't remember what you're stuck on. I like using the nose cam, and it was constantly throwing me back into third person. Gotta have this set up so that it remembers your camera settings. As well, and to be honest, this is probably outside the scope of the budget, but for immersion's sake, I would highly suggest adding a cockpit view, just to get you a little bit more immersed in what your plane is. But creating those assets, especially if each plane were to have a different cockpit, that could get very costly, and I get that. But having a proper cockpit view definitely would increase the sort of immersiveness of the camera. Similarly to how the story has issues with the branching paths, there were some gameplay issues I had with it as well. First and foremost was a bug. The moment where the sort of branching paths happen, I was attacking my target, and the game just sort of forgot what lock-on was for a minute. I had to manually select a new target, and the lock-on feature is a little bit fiddly with its target selection. It tries to sort of go after whatever you're highlighting, but it's a little bit easy to shake, you know? Either way, when I was going through and attacking my target for my moral choice, it broke, and I just had to swap to different targets before it fixed itself, but it's a small thing. It's a little annoying though. Also, I'm just gonna say it, in that level you are faced with the pirates that just sort of show up out of nowhere in their giant battleship, and it is an absolute crime you don't get to fight it. Okay, I get it, it's probably gonna be like a super boss in a later level or something, but the fact that it shows up and I can't just disable its guns or something, come on. That is absolutely a travesty. The other huge issue I have with the branching moral path, or whatever we're calling this, is that the level that follows it, regardless of which version you're on, is basically identical. That would be level 4, I believe? Yeah, regardless of whether you're with the royalty or the pirates, level 4 is basically identical. It's just a different color of the people you're shooting. Even the cutscene is very similar, just shot in a slightly different direction if I remember correctly. You can make the argument this is a callback to Ace Combat 0 that did the same thing, where you'd have multiple branching paths that were the exact same level, except you fought someone slightly different. But I would counter that point by saying, yeah, that was one of the biggest issues with that game. It was incredibly dull to play through it more than once. Levels following the moral choice need to be more varied. Now, fortunately, the final level, which is the second level after the moral choice, that is completely different depending on which side you're playing. If you're playing the royalty, you're flying through these really tight corridors shooting reactors. If you're playing as the pirates, you're doing a trench run through the desert, and I'm getting horrible flashbacks to Rogue Squadron all over again, but it was awesome. It was great to see that these levels were varied, especially after the more disappointing level 4. But I would go back and make level 4 a little bit more different for both routes, because as it stands, they're very similar. Also, I'm just gonna say it, this is totally a me thing, but one of my all-time favorite kind of levels in these sorts of games is the massive furballs, you know, the giant dogfights with tons of different enemies all coming at once. Again, if we're using the Ace Combat analogy, Mayhem in 0 was like the best level for that. This does not have one of those yet. I hope that changes, because huge chaotic dogfights are an absolute treat to be a part of. Speaking of level 5, on the Royal side, something really kind of hit me with the world that needs to be worked on a bit, as it was especially noticeable in 5, but I think it was probably there earlier, and that was, there was a lot of flat ground in this world that made it look very uninteresting and kind of like this is just a flat map. And again, very early game, they could tweak all of this, or heck, even remove the level entirely, but what I'm saying is try and limit your flat areas as much as possible, because your environments are a chance to have your world tell a story, and by keeping them entirely flat, not only are you failing to tell that story and create that world building, but you're also making the game stand out as more gamey, and it's harder to get into the immersion of it, you know? Maybe add some mountains or some other background, ruins or something, just to make it look a little bit less flat. There is one other thing I found kind of frustrating. There is a landing sequence where you have to land your space plane on a space station. And that's fundamentally fine, although the controls for enabling your landing gear are both shoulder buttons at the same time, which feels a little bit fiddly. And it doesn't work unless you've actively selected the runway as an active target, which again just seems a little weird that that's just how that's working. And the way they set it up is a little bit odd as well. Like before you start the mission, they warn you, hey, there's going to be some landing stuff after this, so make sure you've reviewed your controls. Like they make sure you know in advance, but there's still no way to check your controls in game. And again, having two buttons needed to be used simultaneously while at the same time locking onto a thing that already has a visual indicator that it's there, it's just a little bit convoluted and could probably be simplified a little bit more. Overall though, the gameplay is fantastic. What you have here is basically 7 levels of really well-crafted, arcadey flight sim fun, with 2 different styles of play, both in space and in atmosphere, and I hope that the final result of this, whatever it is, has more mixing space and atmosphere combat, because the juxtaposition of mechanics in there and how they fly, it feels fun to just swap between the two. I love that a lot. That was part of the reason I really hated Ace Combat 3. Originally it was supposed to have a lot more of those, but the Western release cut all of them but one, and it just felt like a weird level out of nowhere. Seriously, you've got some really fun mechanics here. Keep that up. In terms of gameplay, I think that Carrier Wing Ypsilon, the plane game, or whatever this thing is going to be called by the end, it feels fun, and if you like Ace Combat games, it's free. Go play it. You've got 7 levels of just fun Ace Combat-y things that absolutely hits the nail on the head for mechanics. Now the overall presentation, like everything, has room to grow, but is ultimately very, very nice. The planes, like I said, look very, very nice, at least the starting one. The later ones could stand to be sci-fi'd up a little bit, but ultimately, I kind of love the space future planes based on older kind of planes look it's going for, and that one plane you start with, very, very cool. It's a favorite of mine in this game, for sure. The characters in between stages in the cutscenes I think could use some work. They do look a little beta placeholder-y. I know that your wingman is basically a faceless grunt, and if he's going to be a big deal, you should probably give him a discernible face. But I think in general, they don't quite have the same amount of polish that something like Gearbits had in its cutscenes, so they might want to be worked on a little bit more. The environments and set pieces, however, look fantastic, and it's definitely on the right course. I think visually it looks pretty well done, and it's definitely going in the right direction. Audio-wise, similarly, it's pretty fantastic. When I heard the beat to the first level kick in, my head was bobbing along like, yeah, this game gets it. I need this soundtrack. It's good. The sound effects are serviceable for what they need to be. However, I noticed that the audio mixing seems to be by default really weird. Like, you can fix this in the audio settings, but the sound effects are tuned way too loud, and I had to go fix that. But again, it's not a frustrating fix, and it's something you can do on your own, but I would suggest by default maybe lowering them in the main game. However, I have one large suggestion that would be massively beneficial to this game, and honestly it might not be within the scope of the game's budget, but I would very seriously suggest considering this, and that is, this game needs voice acting. Like, it really does. And I'm not just saying that because it would improve the presentation, it would do that, but it actually affects the gameplay itself in a game like this. If we were to compare this to the developer's previous game, Gearbits, for a moment, that game didn't have voice acting, and it was totally fine for that. because you were in mechs wandering around the desert. If a big block of text came up and you had to read it, it wasn't that big a deal. However, in a plane, you are constantly fighting with forward momentum. And if you're ace combating down a very narrow corridor to shoot a thing and a box of text shows up in the corner, if you take the time to read that, you will probably die. Creating text in that sort of situation is just a bad idea. That's why a lot of these games do have vocalizations. It's because you don't want to distract your players, especially in tense, actiony situations like that. Now, let's just hypothetically say it's not in the game's budget. Offhand, me just being some guy sitting on his butt right now can come up with a solution for this. It's very cheap, and it would make the game feel a lot more cheap to do it this way, but you could text-to-speech everything and just contrive that in-game it's information being fed to you by your onboard AI or something. It's not a great solution, but it would be a free one, and it would at least not distract players in the most tense moments of the game. Seriously, this game does need voice acting of some description, but overall, the presentation is pretty solid for where it's at. Now, if you want to play Carrier Wing Ypsilon, the plane game, right now, in a pre-release demo state with, at present, no planned release date for a full version or price point, so I can't quote you on that. It is available for free on the developer's itch.io page. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you like Ace Combat, you should play it, because first of all, it's free, but second of all, again, nails the feel. If you love Ace Combat, this is a no-brainer. I mean, I love Ace Combat. I love it enough they named a character after me in it, unless Project Aces was also just a fan of Panzer Dragoon. And I love this game. I just think it needs a lot more refinement and time to cook, but there is definitely a very solid foundation for something amazing here. I think that the developer should be very proud of what they've developed, and that they should keep on this path because it does look very, very promising.